The law. This is Pastor Clay Kendall. I want to thank everybody that has joined in today. It's so good to have you. Let's ask the Father for a word of wisdom on the lesson. Thank you, Father. Okay, today's lesson, the law, or Mosaic law. Now, this is a very deep subject. I could spend, different Sundays on this lesson. But I think I can cover a lot of it. Much of what I will teach or even have taught about the law. Some of it I will bypass because you're already acquainted with it. Some I will repeat, and then hopefully there'll be some things that you didn't know that you can appreciate. The law was written, obviously, to help God's people, kind of give them an instruction booklet. Obviously, we all need that, and that's why we have the the Word of God, the letter He wrote us. But the law in particular, as we have studied many times, and as I've pointed out, really comes in four parts. As you know, it's the statutes, the judgments, the commandments, and the ordinances. And as you also know, only the blood ordinances were nailed to the cross. Only that. And you need to really understand that and grasp that. That's in Colossians 2, reading 9 through 14. You'll understand that. But let's go back. Let's go back to the Exodus. Let's go back to the Exodus, and what did we learn? What do we learn as Bible readers to the point of the Exodus? We do know that to that point, that Israel, it was the origin of Israel, basically, as a people or a nation, a kingdom. And they had a leader, as we know, Moses. Moses being drawn from the water. And even as God, through Christ, He is the living water, drew up the Ten Commandments. Now He was drawn from the water literally on a basket, as we know. But nonetheless, His name certainly tells a story regarding the law. And He was known as the law giver. And of course, Aaron was with him. Aaron was a much more eloquent speaker, but God used Moses. And it's so interesting that God will use, yes, He will use eloquent speakers, of course, but even as Paul said, I'm kind of rough in speech. I'm kind of rude, not rude in English, that's a little bit different. He said, I just kind of say it the way it is, and I'm not so eloquent. Paul admitted that. But he said, others are more eloquent, but they don't know as much as I do. And certainly they weren't, these other speakers weren't, these other eloquent speakers were not taken to the third heaven, that's for sure. So my point is, Israel had their leader, Moses. And several million, something, 2 up to 4, whatever it may be, left Egypt. And, they were going to Mount Sinai. And what was going to happen there? Of course, we know what was going to happen there. They were going to receive the law from God. Now, so we have the marriage covenant, basically, on Mount Sinai. Sinai meaning the rocky region, or rocky. And, they did have a rocky time, by the way, emotionally in the desert, of course, the wilderness. But God was going to have more or less the framing of a constitution, with a Bill of Rights, and just like we have today, He had to give His people, and would give His people, guidelines. And boy, do we need them. Unfortunately, we don't follow them enough. And if you've ever thought the law was dead, and we're going to speak about that a little bit today, just try breaking a few laws. Start breaking the Ten Commandments. And you will find out in a heartbeat, especially if you're a Christian, that they're alive and well. Proof's in the pudding. So nothing's done away with the law. And we're going to explain some of the stuff in the book of Romans where it seems like in English the law is dead, as Paul taught. But he didn't teach that it was literally dead. You have to understand the context of what he was speaking. He was simply saying the ordinances, that part of the law as it was, no longer exists. And now Christ's blood established the law. Instead of animals, Christ's blood replaced. So that's all that changed. But nonetheless, it was different. And that's all Paul certainly was stating. So let us also realize that this law on Mount Sinai was written by God's own hand. Now, when God writes something, He doesn't later destroy it. That's not how it works. His law is good. His law is perfect. He certainly wouldn't destroy that. No, what He did was He destroyed the old law that did not have Christ's blood of forgiveness. They had the animal blood and moral blood. Animals did not have sin, obviously. And so it was a substitute that just bought some time. And once a year the high priest would go in and do his liturgical duties to accomplish the forgiveness of the nations. And it worked. It was okay. In other words, God accepted that. But when Christ died and paid the price one for all, then it was the law of faith and the law of grace. We know that. But I want to bring out that many people think that the law started on Mount Sinai. But it did not start on Mount Sinai. Now, how do we know this? Well, first of all, even in Exodus, the Ten Commandments, by the way, let me refresh. The Ten Commandments are written in Exodus 20 and also Deuteronomy chapter 5. Okay? But before that, in Exodus 18, we have Moses judging the people. Remember the story of Jethro, his father-in-law? And Moses was the only judge. And Jethro, his father-in-law, was going, hey Moses, you look a little busy there. All these people you're judging. Why don't you delegate some authority here? Why don't you get some other people here that understand the law and subordinate to you, but still understand and could be judged, and train them and put 50 in a crowd, 100 in a crowd, or 25, and ease the pressure on yourself. You can imagine how much even the waiting line must have been, like trying to vote on Tuesday, and you get there at a bad time, and it's, you got a line to the road. Well, so we see that Moses, in fact, did that. He did delegate the law. So what law? What was he? You can't judge unless you have some instruction. I mean, did Moses just use his own opinion? Of course not. God gave him something to judge by. Of course. And that's before the Ten Commandments. Well, then where did it begin? Okay. So, well, if we read in the book of Joshua mentions the book of Jasher. Jasher. Now, the book of Jasher, since it's written in the book of Joshua, it's apocryphal, but a good reading. It does state in there that Abraham learned the laws. Now, just think about this. We're talking about Abraham. Way before Moses, 400 years or so? Abraham learned the laws from Noah and Shem. Okay? And he introduced that same law, which certainly would be godly, from the Father, to his family in Ur. That's Babylon. Because Terah, Abraham's father, was a moon worshiper at one time. And Abraham introduced God's law to the family in Ur. That's written in the book of Jasher. But it certainly makes sense. And it also states, if you read further, that the law was taught even further back from the antediluvian patriarchs before the flood. Okay? Now in Genesis 26, now this is Genesis before Exodus, 26:5, God says that Abraham did obey my voice and my laws. Well, what laws? What laws? The law existed. Now we do know even in Babylon, which existed before the flood even, and after, that they had a law, the Hammurabi law. You all were aware of that. They had the Hammurabi law, and I'm sorry I don't know the appendix, but those with companion Bibles can look that up. Bollinger compares the two laws, the Hammurabi law compared to God's law, Mosaic law. And the Mosaic law was certainly better. Obviously, that's directly from God himself. But God did give his other people, the Gentile nations, a law too, to work with. And the Hammurabi law was, when you read it, it's a good law. They had some good laws in there. Not as good as Mosaic, but good. But good. Okay? So, again, we have a law then before Mount Sinai. Okay? So when did the law really begin? Think about it. It began in the Garden of Eden. Okay? What law was that? Well, it's called the Edenic law. The Edenic law simply was, thou shalt not eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Now that one statement, that's one statement, but it's very broad. When it's do not worship or eat from Lucifer, that means whatever he throws at you, which is a lot of things. So that's just one little statement of a law, but it covers a lot of things. Okay? So understand that there was a law right away. Edenic law. Okay? I believe it's also called patriarchal law, but nonetheless, Edenic law. And so we're going back to the Garden of Eden. And then from there, certainly, the law was all the way to Moses. Well, so what happened then? What was the law on Mount Sinai then? What was that? It was more or less a reinstatement, another start. It's kind of like if somebody has a friendship and it goes bad, and then 2 or 3 years and the two friends make up and kind of start afresh, and they forgive each other, and then they get started again. That's more or less what that was, a rejuvenation. Much like, if I could make the comparison, Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, the difference where God. Well, let me just say it this way. Genesis 1, the whole chapter, even through the 6 days, that was a rejuvenation of the world, not a new world created. Now, I'm not going to get into that subject, but those that are acquainted with that subject that I've taught many times, kind of use that as an example. It's not a new created world, but a rejuvenation of what was already here. That's basically what Mount Sinai was with the law. It was a reinstatement. Okay, guys, now let's get this together. And let's start over, and here's some laws. And then, of course, the 10 Commandments really nailed down what they needed to learn and needed to take with them. You know, there's nothing really, they're so complete, the 10 Commandments, that if you take away one, it doesn't make it valid. It's really short. And you know what? It's so complete also that you can't really add another one. It's just perfect. 10. Okay. So they had a law. And then the law, as time goes on, laws are like the Bill of Rights. Things are added to laws, to the Constitution as need be. And that did happen, of course. And so the 10 Commandments was even part of that on Mount Sinai. Okay. So let's go then, knowing that then, let's go to Paul's writings that are so misconstrued that let's try to understand now better Paul's writings. Let's start in Romans chapter 2. I'm going to have about 6 or 7 references. You can write them down. You can follow me along, whatever you want to do. But Romans 2, I'm going to read 12 through 15. It's really 14 and 15, but I want to read a little bit before so we get the context. Let's read. Paul says, "For as many that have sinned without the law," that means without Mosaic law, because we know the Gentiles had a law. We know the law of nature, the Hammurabi law. Is he talking about the Hammurabi law here? Without the law means Mosaic law, okay? Those that have sinned without the law shall perish without the law. And as many have sinned in the law, that's in the Mosaic law, God's people Israel, be judged by the law. I mean, how could you be judged by a law that God didn't give you, right? You can only be judged with what God gives you, which gets you even to the point where you're only judged for what you know. And even in God's Word, you're only judged for what your knowledge is. The more given, the more expected. The less given, the less expected. I want to say that's Luke 12, 48 and 49. I think my memory's right there, but We all know that. Let's continue. 13. For not the hearers of the law are just before God, but the doers of the law shall be justified. That's a very powerful statement. The doers. For when the Gentiles, which have not the law, the Gentiles didn't have the Mosaic law, do by nature, just by common sense, by God's nature, things contained in the law. These, having not the law, are a law unto themselves. In other words, even if God didn't tell you, love your neighbor, or be good to love your children, that's more or less an innate spirit in you, that when you have children that come from you, that's your DNA, you love them. You naturally care for them. Now, God doesn't even have to put that down in a book. You know that just inside your spirit and who you are. That's the law of nature. Just because you're not a Christian, does that mean you're mean to people? No, because you understand the law of nature that if you're mean to people, they're going to be mean back. And you're not going to get along very well. There's an easy way and a hard way to live, right? That's a natural law. So there's that law, and I'm telling you, it's just as equal to the law of gravity, if not more. 15. Which show the work of the law written in their hearts or their minds, their conscience also bearing witness, and their thoughts the meanwhile accusing or else accusing one another. So that's what he's saying. If you're mean to somebody, in other words, the golden rule. The golden rule is just simple. You don't even have to say it. It's something we all know. Okay? So other than Satan's children, literally, God's people are naturally good to one another. And then, of course, in sin, through jealousy and envy and covetousness and on it goes, then lust and on it goes, that's where we turn into bad hombres, can I say, okay? We can make some serious mistakes through sin. But outside that, naturally we know to treat people good. That's a law of nature. So just because they didn't have the Mosaic law, speaking of those outside Israel, they had a law, the law of nature, and they knew basically right from wrong. All right, so I wanted to bring that out so you understood that. Now, I'm going to turn, our next reference is going to be Romans 3:31. And let me read, do we then make void, Paul teaching, do we then make void the law? Now, when he says the law, don't put natural law. When you read the word law, he means Mosaic law, old Mosaic law. Whenever you read the word law, just read old Mosaic law, Old Testament law. Okay, do we make void the Old Testament law through faith? Question. He says, God forbid, yea, we establish the law. We don't destroy it. We don't destroy something that's perfect and that can work for us. I mean, we don't stop honoring our mother and father because Christ died. That doesn't mean now we can kill premeditated murder because Christ died. We can't just start coveting because Christ died. We can't start eating pork just because Christ died. Now I'm getting into a little more bylaws and statutes, but you get the point. You get the point. So the law is not voided, it's established. It's established. What is it, Matthew? I'm guessing, I don't have it written down. Matthew 5:17. I hope I'm right on that. Christ didn't come to destroy the law. He came to establish the law. Okay, so we all know that. All right, so let's go to some more here. Let me continue. Let's go to Romans chapter 6:14. And let's read. And it says, for sin shall not have dominion over you, for ye are not under the law, but under grace. Now, when you read that verse just in itself in English, for sin shall not have dominion over you, for ye are not under the law. Oh, we're not under the law anymore. We're under grace. You see how easily we can be fooled in the English. The English language, anybody will tell you, any foreign country or foreigner will tell you that's the hardest language to understand because it can mean so many things. Well, that's what the translators of the 1611 Bible ran into. And that's why they wrote that letter. Hey, be a little suspicious here. Dig for yourself along with God's Spirit. Okay, so what he's saying, for sin shall not have dominion over you. He's saying now that you have Christ's blood for forgiveness, sin doesn't have to have dominion over you. You have forgiveness, and you can go any time of the day, 24/7, and ask for forgiveness. You don't need a high priest, and you don't need a father, as we have in some churches, let me say. We don't need that. We can go right to the Father. Okay? So we're under grace. What he's really saying is we're not under the Mosaic law as it was. We're not under it as it was with animal blood anymore. We're under grace, but we certainly live by the law. We certainly try. We have to be, what did it say in the earlier chapter 2 here, 12, Romans 2:12? We have to be doers. Doers of what? The law. So the one statement for ye are not under the law, they take that and run with it. And of course, how foolish can you be? But if you don't read the Bible all around, that's what you run into. Let's go to chapter 8 in Romans. It's amazing. The whole book of Romans and Galatians even is all about the law. It's not that complicated. Why did Paul have to write so much to explain this simple law? Simple law, simple instruction. Well, it is what it is, and he did a good job. Let's go to 8:2. For the law of the Spirit of life in Jesus Christ, that's the blood, hath made me free from the law of sin and death. Why? Because you can go to Christ through faith, ask for forgiveness. Psalms 103:12 kicks in. God says, I forgive you east to the west. I've thrown it away. Don't bring it up anymore. Don't bring it up anymore. It's over with. I've buried it. God doesn't want to hear about it anymore. In fact, I wouldn't. My children, if I discipline them, I don't want them to keep coming up to me. I'm sorry, Dad. I should have done that. I'm sorry, Dad. I shouldn't have done that. Dad, I'm sorry. Hey, I got it. Don't bring that up anymore. The same thing. God forgives you, and if you keep bringing it up, you're re-crucifying Christ, and he doesn't like it. Okay. So for the law of the Spirit of life in Jesus Christ hath made me free from the old Mosaic law of sin and death. Because the old Mosaic law of sin and death, if we didn't have Christ, we ain't making it. Sorry. We're not going to make it. Okay? That's all he's saying. So do we take these words, Jesus Christ, if I take that verse right in the middle, and say, Christ Jesus hath made me free from the law. I'm free from the law. I can drive as fast as I want down the highway. I'm not under the law. Really? In fact, I remember Pastor Murray once telling a story of a lady, seriously, driving. They were speeding, got picked up, and she told the officer, well, sir, he given her a ticket, and he said, well, sir, we're not under the law. Seriously, true story. I'm sure that officer had a grand time with that. But so we can be looked at very foolishly by not understanding the truth of the matter. Read the Bible all around, of course. Let's do another one. Let's go to chapter 10, Romans, verse 4. For Christ is the end of the law, for righteousness to everyone that believeth. For Christ is the end of the law? Wow, he ended the law. No, it didn't say he ended the law. It says that he was the end of it. He was the last puzzle piece of the law to establish it. Okay? So if you're looking at this as a time clock, 8 to 5, looking at the Old Testament, in Genesis being 8 o'clock, Joshua being 8:30, the Psalms being noon, okay, and the minor prophets being 1 o'clock, and the New Testament being 5 o'clock, okay? At 5 o'clock, at the very end, Christ came in and saved, can I put it that way? He saved the law with his blood. So he was the end person, the end deity, the end piece. I like to say the final puzzle piece of the law of righteousness. To who? to everyone that believeth. If you don't believe, then it doesn't work. Okay, in fact, you're not even under the law. You're not judged by it. You're judged outside it. Okay? So understand, but if you look at that verse, for Christ is the end of the law. Stop. If you just look at that, we're not. Okay, so you must please read the whole verse and that with the whole Bible to fully understand what Paul taught. Let's do another one. Let's go to, I hope I'm not wearing you out here. It's just stuff we got to know. My gosh, it's already 22. Romans 13:10. Romans 13:10. It says, love worketh no ill to his neighbor. Now you think about the last 5, 10 of the commandments, or the last 4 for sure. Therefore love is the fulfilling of the law. Did you get that? Love worketh no ill to his neighbor. What he's saying is, read the last 4 of the 10 commandments. 6, 7, 9, 10. Did I say that's actually, yeah, 6 through 10, okay? 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's actually 5. Started from 6, my bad. Okay, I'll get my math right here. I don't need a calculator. I'll figure it out. So the last 5, starting from 6, is about our neighbor. Do not covet. Okay, do not kill, and these things. Do not steal. Okay. So love worketh no ill to his neighbor. He's saying the last 5 of the 10 commandments, therefore, are the fulfilling of the law. Boy, I don't know. That's about as straightforward as you can get, right? Okay. Now, I'm going to back up just one place here real quick. Chapter 7. And is it verse 12? Let me just read 12 through 14. It reads, wherefore the law is holy, wherefore the Mosaic law is holy. Well, absolutely. How do we know it was holy? God wrote it. Okay? He wrote the 10 commandments, and the others were given to holy men, and not perfect men. Holy men. And the commandment, holy and just and good. That's a check for the law is good, right? Was then that which is good made death unto me? That's what he's saying. How can something be so good be bad for me? God forbid, but sin, that it might appear sin, working death in me, that by which is good, that sin by the commandment made me exceedingly sinful. Okay? For we know that the law is spiritual, but I am carnal, sold under sin. Hey, we need the law. We are not perfect. We're only perfect through Jesus Christ and through that prism of Christ, and we're seen perfect. We're not perfect, but we're seen perfect, and it goes down as we are perfect. Now, I'm almost done. Let me just go a few more here. I'm going to go to Galatians 5:4, and it says, Christ became of no effect to you, whosoever of you are justified by the law, ye are fallen from grace. If you want to go back to the old Mosaic law and try to bring that for, do that for salvation, if you're trying to be saved by the old law, forget it. It won't work. That's what he's saying in Galatians 5:4. And then finally, the last one, let's go to 1 Timothy, 1 Timothy 1:8, and let me read. But we know that the law is good, if a man use it lawfully. In other words, if you're using it accordingly. If you're not trying to use it to be saved and to get to heaven. Now, if you're trying to use the old Mosaic law to get to heaven, you're not using it lawfully, and you lose. So the law is good if you understand you're trying to do the things it says to improve your life and those around you, and you use forgiveness through Christ's blood, not an animal. We don't sacrifice any animals anymore, do we? And through Christ, we can pray forgiveness. That's using the law lawfully. Now, really, isn't that simple? I think it is. And yet, Paul had to write so much. He had to write so much on that. And it's amazing he had to do it like that, because it doesn't seem that difficult. Okay, so what do we learn? Well, we know the 10 Commandments that are basically codified expressions of basic principles, okay, the framework of what we're supposed to live by, okay. In fact, the Ten Commandments, all the other laws and statutes kind of rest upon it. They really do. That's why Christ said the two laws are love thy Father with all thy heart, soul, and mind, and also thy neighbor. The golden rule. The first five, let's say, are regarding God. The fifth commandment is regarding your parents, but hey, He's our Father too. And the last five would be concerning your neighbor. Okay, so I want to cover one more thing, because we do know that during Moses' time, there's things that have changed, right? I mean, for example, in Exodus, I'm going to read this. I'm going to give you an example of a law. If you read it literally, it's hard to apply today. You can, but it doesn't really fit very well, because times have changed. Okay? Not too many people own oxen anymore. They own cars, okay, to get around and whatever. And they have tractors to do their work. But let me read Exodus 20. So what I'm getting at is you have to understand the spirit of that law. That's what carries on through. But let's read. If an ox gore a man or a woman, that they die, then the ox shall surely be stoned, and his flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall be quit or acquitted. But if the ox were wont to push with his horns in time past, and it hath been testified to his owner, in other words, the owner knew it was a mean bull, and he didn't take care of it properly, and he hath not kept him in the fence, but that he hath killed a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and his owner also shall be put to death. Whoa! In other words, if you're not responsible, you're not being a responsible person for your deeds, even your oxen, and it kills somebody, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Now let's update that though for today then. We know the issue's basically pretty clear, okay? If somebody owns an ox, it's been a wild bull or whatever, and you didn't take care of it, something happens, you're liable for that. That's it, okay? So what do we use for today then? For kind of to understand the spirit of that law, because we don't own, none of us here own an oxen, okay? Well, we could say what else would be a menace to society, basically. Well, an automobile. Well, we've all heard of vehicular homicide, right? Okay, so if you substitute that for the oxen, if you're driving along and an accident happens and you kill someone, well then you're acquitted because it was an accident. You weren't negligent, just something happened. But if you were drinking and driving, or being rather foolish driving, speeding, okay, way over the speed limit, and then you kill somebody, guess what? The law kicks in. Now let me tell you something, and you all know this is true, that if we had that law, that if you were drinking and driving and being reckless and you killed somebody and the law was your life, I mean, do you think that drinking and driving would be under control? Well, of course it would. We know it would for one reason. Why? Not only the law of nature, but God would see a nation carrying forth His law. He would bless that. You know it. He says He will. He blesses His law. But, of course, we don't do that. Now, we do have capital punishment in many cases. Praise God for that. But, and of course, the religion of humanism kicks in, and, oh, we put a man to death. Oh, I'm so sad, and his family. And it goes on, and I've seen programs on it, and they really bleed to your heart. And well, let me tell you something. This tough love here. It may happen once, and it may happen to your own child, but if that's a grave lesson for everybody else, then that's so be it. So be it. And we would definitely have our nation under control with drinking and driving and murder and other things. and rape. And so anyway, I hope we're out of time. I hope you enjoyed the lesson. The basis is the law started in Eden, didn't start on Mount Sinai. It was basically just reestablished, refurbished. The 10 Commandments were there, and from there it even went further. And I wanted to bring that out, and also to understand the old law, the spirit of the old law, that never changes. So anyway, okay, well, I hope you enjoyed the lesson today. Make sure to share the gospel with somebody this week. Will you do that? You'll be blessed for it. Talk next week.